In the world of Bleach, power is rarely what it seems. A Bankai is supposed to be the ultimate release, the final form of a Soul Reaper's Zanpakut. Bigger, stronger, more destructive. That's what most people see when a Soul Reaper reaches the pinnacle of their training, when they call out the name of their blade's truest form and the world around them shifts. The sky darkens. The ground shatters. The air itself seems to bow. That's what most people see, but that's not the truth. Because the most dangerous part of a Bankai is often hidden. Not in its size, not in the spectacle of petals raining down like blades, or ice spreading across continents, or flames that reduce mountains to ash. The spectacle is noise, impressive, terrifying noise, but noise nonetheless. The silence is where the killing lives. It lives in the subtle mechanics, the abilities that aren't explained, the conditions that aren't obvious, the techniques that transform a powerful weapon into something far more surgical and lethal. It lives in the secondary effects that don't announce themselves, the passive systems that are already working before the opponent even recognizes the threat. These are the killing moves that don't bow and introduce themselves. They don't roar or flash, they simply end. Tonight, we break down the hidden killing moves behind some of the most iconic Bankai in Bleach, and explain in full why they are far more dangerous than they first appear. What Bankai really is. Before we get into individual Bankai, we need to address a fundamental misconception. Most people, including many characters within the series, treat Bankai as a power upgrade, as though it's simply the next gear on a vehicle. Shikai is second gear, Bankai is fifth. Go fast, hit harder, win fight. But that framing misses the entire point. Bankai is not just power amplification. It is mastery. It is understanding. It is the complete synchronization between a Soul Reaper and their Zanpakut, a relationship so intimate, so deeply internalized that the two beings become functionally one. The sword is no longer a tool the Soul Reaper wields. It is an extension of who they are, of their deepest nature, their philosophy, their very soul made manifest in spiritual steel. This is why learning Bankai typically takes decades, not because the technique is complicated, but because the understanding required is profound. You cannot force your Zanpakut into its final form. You have to earn it through genuine comprehension of what your blade is and what it is trying to become. Number 10 is Ichigo Kurosaki, Tensa Zangetsu, the compression principle. Ichigo Kurosaki's Bankai is perhaps the most misunderstood in the entire series, and deliberately so. When Ichigo first activates Tensa Zangetsu, experienced fighters don't see what they expect. There are no dramatic physical transformations, no enormous constructs rising from the earth, no sweeping elemental domination of the battlefield. What they see instead is a shorter, sleeker black blade, a long black coat, and a young man who appears, deceptively, to have given up everything that should make a Bankai impressive. That appearance is not a weakness. It is the weapon. The hidden killing move of Tensa Zangetsu lies in the principle of compression. Where other Bankai expand power outward, spreading influence across the battlefield, growing larger, becoming more, Ichigo's Bankai does the opposite. It turns inward. It condenses. Every ounce of Ichigo's immense spiritual pressure, rather than radiating outward like a storm, is packed into a single, focused, controlled form. What this creates is not just raw speed. What this creates is a fundamental mismatch in how the fight is perceived. Opponents calibrate to threat based on visible power. They read the size of a Bankai, the scope of its effects, the energy it projects, and they calculate their response accordingly. Against a Bankai that produces enormous scale, they prepare for enormous scale. They brace, expand their own defenses, look for cover or counters that match the spectacle. Ichigo gives them nothing to calibrate to. His striking power exceeds what his frame suggests. His speed exceeds what his movements telegraph. His attacks land at ranges and angles that don't match his apparent position, because the compression of his spiritual pressure has fundamentally altered the physics of how his strikes propagate. Byakuya Kuchiki, Senbonzakura Kagayoshi, the illusion of abundance. Byakuya Kuchiki's Bankai is, on the surface, a spectacle of quantity. Thousands of blades. An ocean of cherry blossom petals that are not petals at all but razor-thin swords, each capable of cutting at the molecular level, filling the air in every direction until the battlefield becomes a lethal, all-encompassing sea of steel. Against this display, opponents naturally focus on the overwhelming number, trying to track, to dodge, to find some gap or weakness in the swarm. That focus is exactly what Byakuya wants them to have, because the hidden killing move of Senbonzakura, Kageyoshi, is not the swarm. The swarm is a decoy. The swarm is Byakuya giving the opponent something enormous to think about while the real threat takes shape. The true killing mechanism is control density, the ability to collapse the swarm. When Byakuya deploys Senkei, the scattered thousands of blades converge into a small unified formation. All that distributed lethality, all that vast coverage, is suddenly concentrated into a tight corridor of absolute precision. The attack transforms from area saturation into targeted execution. There is no longer anywhere to dodge. There is no longer any calculation to be made about which blades to avoid. Everything is aimed at one outcome, through one channel, with no deviation permitted. And then there is Shamokei, Hakuteiken, the final compression. All thousands of blades merge into a single, incandescent sword of pure white light, carrying within it the combined cutting force of every blade that came before. It is not an attack you can tank through endurance. It is not an attack you can outmaneuver with speed. It exists at a scale that simply does not permit survival through conventional means. Number 8 is Toshiro Hitsugaya, Daigoren Hyorin Maru. When ice becomes concept. Toshiro Hitsugaya's Bankai is genuinely misunderstood even by people who should know better. The assumption, held by opponents and casual observers alike, is that Daigoren Hyorin Maru is an ice Bankai. A very powerful ice Bankai, capable of generating enormous volumes of ice, spreading cold across vast areas, encasing opponents in near inescapable frozen prisons. All of this is true, and all of this is the surface. The hidden killing move is revealed only when the Bankai reaches its completed state, when the ice flowers that bloom at Hitsugaya's back have fully opened, when the weapon has matured through the sustained energy of ongoing combat. In this state, Daigoren Hyorin Maru does not merely freeze bodies, it freezes concepts. Number 7 is Kenpachi Zaraki, unnamed Bankai, the weapon that threatens its owner. Kenpachi. Zaraki's Bankai defies almost every principle that makes a Bankai sophisticated. There is no complexity here, no layered mechanics, no illusions or psychological warfare or domain-based conceptual negation. Kenpachi's Bankai is, in the most literal sense possible, a manifestation of raw destructive force. An explosion of power so immense, so unrefined, so absolutely concentrated on a single outcome, destroy everything in reach, that it functions on a different axis entirely from every other Bankai on this list. And yet, the hidden killing move of Kenpachi's Bankai is not what it does to opponents. Opponents, frankly, tend not to survive long enough for the subtlety to matter against them. The hidden killing move is what it does to Kenpachi himself. Number 6 is Shunsui Kyoraku, Katen Kyokotsu, Karamatsu Shinju, the story that cannot end differently. Shunsui Kyoraku's Bankai is, by a significant margin, the most psychologically devastating ability in the series. And it is devastating not because of what it destroys, but because of what it removes. Specifically, the opponent's most fundamental resource in any fight, the possibility of a different outcome. The hidden killing move of Karamatsu Shinju lies in what can only be described as narrative inevitability. Once the Bankai is activated, the opponent is enrolled, without choice, in a sequence of acts, a structured dramatic progression that maps directly onto the stages of despair, physical deterioration, and death. The acts do not represent possible outcomes. They represent a fixed sequence that moves forward regardless of the opponent's resistance. There is no escape from the acts. There is no counter technique that disrupts the progression. There is no threshold of spiritual pressure sufficient to break out of the narrative structure because the narrative structure is not a spiritual technique in the conventional sense. It is something more fundamental, more akin to a change in the rules of the space the opponent occupies. The horror of this Bankai is not pain, though there is pain. It is not damage, though there is damage. It is the removal of agency. The opponent continues to act, continues to fight, continues to throw everything they have into survival, and none of it changes what is going to happen. The story has been written. The ending is fixed. Against most powerful opponents, even devastating Bankai leave a sliver of possibility. The chance that extraordinary power or creativity or will might find a way through. Karamatsu Shinju forecloses that possibility by design. The Bankai does not fight you. It tells a story. And you are forced to reach the ending. Number 5 is Rukia Kuchiki, Haka no Togami, the cost of perfection. Rukia Kuchiki's true Bankai is a study in absolute precision balanced against absolute consequence. On its surface, Haka no Togami appears to be an elegant, refined execution tool, the ability to generate true absolute zero, a temperature so extreme that it does not merely freeze matter but causes matter to cease behaving according to the laws that govern normal physical interaction. Spiritual particles themselves, the fundamental building blocks of everything in the Bleach universe, are neutralized. What this Bankai produces, at peak function, is not cold. It is the absence of the conditions that allow existence to continue. The hidden killing move, however, is not in what it does to opponents. It is in what it does to Rukia. In activating Haka no Togam and generating absolute zero, Rukia's own body enters the same process she is inflicting on her target. She becomes a vessel for the freezing, with her spiritual pressure cycling through temperatures that her biological and spiritual architecture was not designed to sustain indefinitely. The margin between maintaining the Bankai and being consumed by it is extraordinarily thin, thinner than almost any other Bankai's self-risk, including Kenpachi's, because at least Kenpachi's risk is gradual and visible. Rukia's risk is quiet and immediate. A miscalculation in control, a wavering of focus, an unexpected disruption, an error in the precision with which she manages the temperatures moving through her, and the Bankai that was killing her opponent kills her instead. Or kills them both simultaneously, which is not a resolution in any meaningful sense. Number 4 is Renji Abarai, Suzabimaru, Evolution through Division. Renji Abarai's journey to his true Bankai is itself a lesson in the difference between power and understanding. His original Bankai, Hihio Zabimaru, was functional but fundamentally incomplete, reflecting a relationship with his Zanpakuto that had not yet reached full comprehension. His true Bankai, Suzabimaru, revealed what the weapon had always been trying to become. The hidden killing move lies in segmented independence, where most weapons require a user to direct every attack from a single origination point, creating predictable attack geometries that skilled opponents can read and respond to. Suzabimaru operates through coordinated independent segments, capable of originating strikes from multiple directions simultaneously. The individual pieces of the weapon are not simply extensions of Renji's reach. They are semi-autonomous attack vectors, capable of closing different angles at different speeds with different trajectories. The mathematics of defense against this system become rapidly untenable. Defending against a single direction of attack is a tractable problem. Defending against simultaneous attacks from multiple directions, with no single point of origin to target or disrupt, requires a qualitatively different defensive capability than most opponents carry. And because the segments can reconfigure between attacks, the geometry never settles into a pattern. There is no figuring out how Suzabimaru works through experience, because the attack patterns available to it are not fixed. Number 3 is Meiri Kurotsuchi, Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo, the weapon that learns. Of all the Bankai discussed here, Meiri Kurotsuchi's is the one that should disturb people the most, because it is the only one that actively evolves. Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo is, on the surface, a massive caterpillar-like entity that distributes a neurotoxic poison across the battlefield. This is already significantly threatening. But the poison composition, the entity's structure, its specific target parameters, the nature of what it inhibits. All of these are adjustable. All of these are variables that Mayuri can modify in real time and between encounters. The hidden killing move is not in the poison. It is in the adaptive loop. If an opponent develops a resistance to the current poison formula, Mayuri adjusts the formula. If the entity's movement patterns allow for prediction, Mayuri restructures its behavior. If a specific defensive ability counters the current form of the Bankai, Mayuri redesigns around that defensive ability. This creates a weapon with no fixed counter, because every counter Mayuri observes simply becomes input for the next iteration. Fighting Mayuri once gives him information he uses to kill you more efficiently the second time. Fighting him twice gives him more. There is no accumulated experience with this Bankai that produces an advantage for the opponent. Every encounter, paradoxically, makes the Bankai more dangerous to the person gaining that experience. This is why Mayuri, despite having a comparatively less flashy Bankai than many of his colleagues, is considered among the most genuinely dangerous captains. His weapon is not impressive in the way that Yamamoto's or Byakuya's is impressive. It is insidious in a way that has no natural ceiling it learns. It adapts. And the longer you survive it, the harder it becomes to survive it. Eventually, it becomes impossible. Number 2 is Yamamoto, Zanka no Tachi, Existence. Erasure, Genryusai. Shigakuni. Yamamoto is the oldest, most experienced, and arguably most powerful Soul Reaper in the history of the Soul Society. His Bankai matches every one of those distinctions, and then conceals its most lethal aspect behind what appears to be a deliberate reduction in scale. Zanka no Tachi is a weapon that pulls all fire, all heat, all combustion back into the blade. The entire atmosphere around Yamamoto, which should, based on the spiritual pressure he carries, be a continuous conflagration, becomes eerily calm. The sword appears to do nothing dramatic. It does not explode outward. It does not fill the sky with fire. And that restraint is the hidden killing move. Because what that restraint means is that every degree of temperature that should be distributed across a massive area, temperatures capable of burning entire dimensions, temperatures that make conventional flames seem arctic by comparison, has been concentrated into a single blade edge. Contact with that edge does not burn. It does not scorch or char or incinerate in any conventional sense. It erases. The temperatures involved are sufficient to neutralize the spiritual particles that comprise both matter and spiritual beings, essentially unraveling the molecular and spiritual structure of whatever the blade touches at a level too fundamental for regeneration or resistance to address. There are no explosions, no firestorms, no visible demonstration of the weapon's power until contact occurs. And after contact occurs, there is simply disappearance. Against a weapon that erases rather than destroys, there are no bodies left to regenerate from. No spiritual pressure remaining to fuel a recovery. No residue from which something might be rebuilt. Just absence where something used to be. That is not a killing move. That is the philosophical endpoint of offensive capability, the philosophy of hidden power. What makes these Bankai truly terrifying, what makes them worth this level of analysis, is not their visible strength. It is the recognition of a pattern across all of them. The most dangerous element is never what announces itself. Ichigo's Bankai is not a threat because of speed. It is a threat because opponents cannot calibrate to it. Byakuya's Bankai is not lethal because of the swarm. It is lethal because the swarm is a feint. Hitsugaya's Bankai does not win fights by freezing bodies. It wins by freezing the concept of resistance. Shunsui's Bankai does not kill through pain. It kills through the removal of possibility. This is a philosophical argument dressed in combat mechanics. The hidden killing move in each case is a statement about the nature of power itself. Real power, the kind that ends conflicts rather than simply winning individual exchanges, is not about outmatching strength with greater strength. It is about shifting the axis entirely, making the opponent's strength irrelevant. Finding the layer beneath combat, the layer that governs how combat is possible at all, and operating there. Every fighter who faces these Bankai without understanding their hidden mechanics is, functionally, fighting a different battle than the one they're in. They are preparing counters to the visible element, while the invisible element is already doing its work. They are calculating responses to the swarm, while the precision is already forming. They are bracing for the fire, while the void in the blade is already close. This is mastery, not just of power, but of perception, of information management, of knowing exactly how the opponent is reading the fight and giving them a reading that serves your ends rather than theirs. The most dangerous abilities are not the ones you can see. They are the ones you don't understand until it's too late. And in the world of Bleach, by then, the fight was already over. Bankai is not the end of power. It is the beginning of understanding. Understanding of the self, understanding of the blade, understanding of the gap between what power appears to be and what it actually does. The greatest Bankai users in the series are not the ones who can generate the most destructive energy. They are the ones who have internalized the deepest truths about how their power works, and how to ensure that by the time an opponent grasps those truths, the fight is already done. That is the real lesson of every hidden killing move on this list. Not technique, not power, not spiritual pressure, understanding. And for those who underestimate it, who see the petals and miss the execution, who see the ice and miss the concept, who see the fire drawn inward and don't understand what that means, that understanding arrives exactly once. At the cost of everything.